You know that moment when you realize your sister's perfect day has a 6-month expiration date? Well, mine lasted exactly 17 seconds, the time it took for 300 of Greenwich, Connecticut's finest to notice that the bride's $78,000 Vera Wang dress was performing its own striptease act right there in the Covington Country Club. I'm Thea Remington, 29, assistant editor at Vogue, and proud architect of the most spectacular wardrobe malfunction in Connecticut high society history. If that makes me sound vindictive, just wait until you hear what my darling sister Pearl did to deserve it. Sisters are supposed to share clothes, not destroy them and gaslight you about it afterward. 2 years before Pearl's wedding catastrophe, I was preparing for my graduation from Parsons School of Design. 6 grueling years of all-nighters, caffeine addictions, and rejections had finally paid off. I wasn't just graduating, I was launching. The Marchesa vintage dress I'd found at a boutique in Brooklyn wasn't just fabric, it was my golden ticket. That dress cost me 6 months of ramen dinners, canceled subscriptions, and picking up weekend shifts at a coffee shop in Chelsea where finance bros tipped in business advice instead of actual money. It's an investment piece, I explained to my roommate Sybil while twirling in front of our cracked bathroom mirror. Eleanor Montgomery from Vogue will be at graduation. If she notices me in this dress, I'm in. The dress was a masterpiece. Emerald silk that made my eyes look like actual gemstones, with vintage beading that caught the light in a way that screamed, "Hire this woman immediately." I'd already been rejected by Vogue twice, but third time's the charm when you're wearing something that belongs in their archive. 3 days before graduation, I came home from my final presentation to find my apartment door unlocked. Inside, Pearl was lounging on my sofa, scrolling through Instagram with the casual entitlement that comes from never paying your own rent. "Needed to borrow something for the Children's Hospital Gala tonight," she announced without looking up from her phone. "Mom said you wouldn't mind." My heart dropped faster than Manhattan real estate values during a recession. "Please tell me you didn't take the Marchesa." Pearl's silence confirmed my worst fear. My sister, who treated designer clothes like Kleenex, used once and discarded, had borrowed the centerpiece of my career launch. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "In my car. Relax, it's fine." It was not fine. When Pearl reluctantly retrieved the dress from her Range Rover, a graduation gift from our parents that still had temporary plates, I discovered a 5-inch tear along the seam and a Cabernet stain blooming across the bodice like a crime scene. "What did you do?" I whispered, my fingers trembling as they traced the destroyed beadwork. Pearl glanced up from her phone long enough to shrug. "Some guy bumped into me with his wine glass. Then I think the beading caught on something when I was dancing. Honestly, it was kind of falling apart anyway. This was for my graduation. Eleanor Montgomery was going to be there." My voice cracked embarrassingly. Pearl rolled her eyes with the practiced dismissiveness of someone who'd never faced consequences. "It's just a dress, Thea. Not like it was actually Marchesa's best work anyway. Was it even real? It looked a little budget. I saved for 6 months. Well, that was stupid when Mom and Dad would have bought you whatever you wanted." She tossed her perfect blonde hair, the result of $800 monthly appointments her trust fund covered. "Just wear something else. You have that black dress from last Christmas." The black dress was a $89 Zara number I'd worn to 3 holiday parties already. Not exactly the career-launching statement piece I'd planned. "Or borrow something of mine," Pearl offered magnanimously, as if she hadn't just destroyed my future. "Though you might need to size up." When I didn't respond, mainly because I was mentally calculating how much bail money I'd need if I strangled her with her own designer scarf, Pearl sighed dramatically. "Look, I said I was sorry. Actually, you didn't." "Well, I am. Sort of. It was an accident. These things happen." She reached for her Prada bag. "Anyway, I've got to run. Tell Mom I can't make Sunday brunch. I'm meeting Sterling's parents at their lake house." Sterling Bishop III was Pearl's newest conquest. Old money, older family name, and the personality of unbuttered toast. They'd been dating for 3 months, and Pearl had already redecorated her entire Instagram aesthetic to match his family's nautical blue and white color scheme. "You destroyed something irreplaceable to me," I said quietly. "Something that mattered." Pearl paused at the door and finally looked at me. Really looked. For maybe 2 seconds. Then came the line that would echo in my head for the next 2 years. It was an accident, Thea. Grow up and get over it. It's not like it was important. Not important. 6 months of sacrifices. My career launch plan. My one shot to stand out. Not important. To Pearl, nothing was important unless it happened to her. I graduated wearing the Zara dress. Eleanor Montgomery didn't notice me. I didn't get the Vogue internship. Instead, I took an editorial assistant position at a smaller publication and spent the next year clawing my way sideways. When a junior position at Vogue finally opened up 14 months after graduation, I worked 80-hour weeks to prove myself. Another 6 months of exemplary performance later, I was promoted to assistant editor. I made it despite Pearl, not because of anything my family did to help. The Marchesa hung in my closet, ruined but not discarded, a reminder that in the Remington family, Pearl broke things, and I cleaned up messes. At least until the day Pearl and Sterling got engaged after a whirlwind 10-month courtship. "You'll be my maid of honor, of course," Pearl informed me over brunch at Bluestone Lane. Not a question, an assignment. "Of course," I replied, stirring my overpriced avocado toast into an unappetizing green mash. "Wouldn't miss it." "The wedding will be at Covington," she continued, flashing her obscene 5-carat diamond. "Sterling's family has connections. Oh, and guess what? Your magazine is covering it. Isn't that fabulous?" I nearly choked on my cold brew. "Vogue is covering your wedding?" "Well, not the main magazine, obviously. The online vertical or whatever. Sterling's godfather knows someone." Pearl waved her hand dismissively. "You can help make sure they get my good side. God knows those fashion photographers can be so artistic they forget about actual beauty." And just like that, the universe handed me something better than a plan. It handed me an opportunity. "I'd be happy to liaise with the team," I said, smiling for the first time that brunch. After all, I know exactly what makes a lasting impression. For the next 6 months, while Pearl tormented wedding planners across Connecticut and made her future mother-in-law question Sterling's life choices, I became the most helpful, enthusiastic maid of honor in bridal history. No task was too small, no detail too insignificant for my attention, especially when it came to Pearl's dress fittings. "The dress is the statement piece," I reminded her during our 3rd visit to the exclusive Manhattan atelier. "Everyone will be looking at it. It needs to be perfect." And it would be perfect. Just not in the way Pearl imagined. Because sometimes revenge isn't about getting even. It's about waiting for the perfect moment to remind someone that everything, even a ruined graduation dress, is important to someone. Wedding planning with Pearl was like watching a documentary on endangered species. Fascinating to observe, but you're constantly aware something beautiful is about to be destroyed. In this case, it was the sanity of everyone involved. "No, absolutely not. The roses need to be alabaster white, not simply white," Pearl snapped at Vivian, the 14th wedding planner she'd cycled through. Poor Vivian, with her sensible pantsuit and increasingly less sensible eye twitch, was visibly calculating if her commission could cover future therapy sessions. "They look completely different under the reception lighting. Don't you understand? It's my wedding." Those 3 words, "It's my wedding," had become Pearl's battle cry, her constitutional amendment, her divine right to terrorize everyone from Manhattan to Greenwich over the next 6 months. These same 3 words would become the soundtrack to my meticulously crafted revenge. Sterling's mother, Olivia Bishop, a woman who wore pearls to bed and had probably never raised her voice above a gentle tennis club cheer, was clearly reconsidering her son's life choices. I caught her popping antacids like they were country club mints during the menu tasting. "Pearl certainly knows what she wants," she whispered to me while my sister berated the pastry chef about fondant thickness. The woman was desperately trying to find something positive to say, like complimenting a tornado on its impressive wind speed. "Oh yes," I agreed, refilling her wine glass. "Pearl has always been incredibly determined, since childhood. Remember when she borrowed my emerald Marchesa dress without asking? I don't believe I destroyed it completely, right before my graduation." I sighed dramatically. "When I mentioned it, she said, and I quote, Get over it. It's not like it was important. Olivia's perfectly Botoxed forehead attempted to crease with concern. How dreadful. Ancient history. I waved dismissively, planting the first seed. I'm sure Sterling has much better respect for property and boundaries. And of course, he's on track for that partner promotion at his firm, from what Pearl has mentioned. Throughout the months of wedding preparations, I became Pearl's shadow, volunteering for every fitting, every tasting, every floral arrangement discussion. My helpfulness was so out of character that our mother actually asked if I was running a fever. You two have never gotten along, she said suspiciously over manicures that Pearl had scheduled then ditched for an emergency session with her eyebrow microblader. People change, Mom. Pearl's happiness is important to me. I selected a nail polish called Revenge Red and smiled serenely. Besides, my magazine connections are helpful for the wedding coverage. What I didn't mention was how I'd spent weeks cultivating a friendship with Madison, the exhausted assistant to Vera Wang's senior alterations specialist. Madison, who Pearl had reduced to tears on 3 separate occasions over invisible wrinkles and imaginary proportions. She made me measure the distance between crystal beads, Madison confided during one of our accidental coffee runs. Twice, with a ruler. Then told me my ruler must be defective because they weren't exactly 2. 7 centimeters apart. That sounds like Pearl. I nodded sympathetically, sliding a coffee card with my number across the table. If you ever need to vent, I'm here. 3 fittings later, when Pearl made Madison restring 4,000 seed pearls because they were the wrong shade of off-white, my phone dinged with a desperate text. She's insisting we reconstruct the entire back panel. Kill me now. This was my moment. Actually, I texted back, I might have a solution. Can you meet tomorrow morning? The back seam of a wedding dress is its structural backbone. It's what keeps the bride's dignity intact while still creating that perfect silhouette. Pearl's dress, a masterpiece of engineering with a 10-foot train and bodice so heavily beaded it added 7 pounds to her already precisely maintained 115-pound frame, required particular reinforcement. My sister's struggling with back pain, I explained to Madison over coffee and 5 crisp $100 bills. Could you modify the structural integrity of the back seam? Nothing major, just enough to provide flexibility. Madison eyed the money. Flexibility? Under pressure. Walking, sitting, standing in front of 300 people while reciting vows. Her eyes widened slightly. Won't it be noticeable during the final fitting? Not if the modifications are in the lower tension points, I explained, having spent 2 weeks researching bridal couture construction on my lunch breaks. They'll only really activate once she's walking with full train weight and maximum stress, like during a processional. Madison bit her lip. And for a moment, I thought my plan might unravel. Then Pearl called her phone, and I watched the assistant physically flinch at the ringtone. She wants to know if we can move tomorrow's 9 a.m. fitting to 7 a.m. because her morning juice cleanse arrives at 8:30, Madison said after declining the call. I slid another $100 across the table. For your alarm clock adjustment. The dress alteration was only Phase 1. Phase 2 required infiltrating the Vogue digital team assigned to the wedding. As assistant editor, I wasn't exactly commanding respect, but I did have access to meeting schedules and email chains. I just think we should ensure we have comprehensive coverage, I suggested during the pre-wedding editorial meeting. Front angles capture emotion, but rear angles capture the architectural elements of couture. The train, the draping, the structural integrity. Thea's right, agreed my supervisor, who was about as interested in Pearl's wedding as I was in Sterling's golf handicap. Get both perspectives. The bride's sister has an excellent eye for detail. I've always been thorough, I smiled modestly. It's important to capture everything. The week before the wedding, Covington Country Club transformed into Pearl's personal kingdom. Sterling's family had spared no expense, at Pearl's insistence. The floral budget alone could have funded a small nonprofit for a year. Pearl became increasingly unbearable as her big day approached. She fired her makeup artist for suggesting a slightly warmer lip tone. She reduced her fitness trainer to tears by accusing him of sabotaging her arms with excessive tricep work. She even snapped at Sterling when he suggested a honeymoon location without checking her pre-approved list. Through it all, I was the perfect sister, attentive, supportive, and meticulously documenting every bridezilla moment in a private album titled Receipts. The night before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner at Covington's exclusive River Room, Pearl clinked her glass for an impromptu speech. "I just want to thank everyone for making my vision come to life," she announced to the room of exhausted wedding professionals and family members with thousand-yard stares. "Especially my sister Thea, who's been surprisingly helpful." She turned to me with a condescending smile. "I know fashion events aren't usually your forte, given how your own big fashion moment turned out." The table fell awkwardly silent. Sterling cleared his throat nervously. "But tomorrow will be absolutely perfect," Pearl continued, oblivious to the discomfort she'd created. "Every detail exactly as I've planned." I raised my glass and matched her smile with surgical precision. "To perfect moments," I toasted, "and getting exactly what you deserve." That night, I slept better than I had in 2 years, dreaming of seams under pressure and the precise mathematics of structured failure. Morning arrived with picture-perfect weather, sunny with decorative clouds that looked photoshopped into the Connecticut sky. Pearl had probably threatened Mother Nature personally. The Covington Country Club buzzed with activity, florists making final adjustments to the 22 floral installations, catering staff preparing for the 5-course dinner, and the Vogue team setting up strategic photography points. From the bridal suite, I heard Pearl terrorizing her makeup artist about contouring while I slipped away to confirm my arrangements with both Madison and the photography director. Everything was in place. 6 months of planning, 2 years of waiting, and 15 years of sisterly resentment were about to pay off in spectacular fashion. Or rather, fashion failure. 10 minutes until showtime, the wedding coordinator announced, her cheerful tone betraying the manic desperation in her eyes. Pearl was still seated at the vanity, criticizing the hairstylist's definition of effortlessly elegant. When I say effortless, I mean it should look effortless while taking maximum effort, Pearl explained as if teaching quantum physics to a toddler. This looks actually effortless, which is just lazy. I seized my opportunity during the ensuing chaos, slipping out with Pearl's emergency styling kit, a carefully packed bag containing double-sided tape, mini sewing kit, and the special adhesive designed to keep wardrobe malfunctions at bay. Oops, must have misplaced that somewhere between the bridal suite and the chapel. When I returned, Pearl was finally in her dress, 37 pounds of silk, crystals, and structural engineering. She looked stunning, which annoyed me. Villains shouldn't get to be beautiful on their big day. That's just cosmic injustice. "You look perfect," I said, meaning it. The dress was magnificent, a testament to what unlimited funds and terrorized professionals could achieve. The irony that it would soon become Pearl's greatest humiliation wasn't lost on me. "I know," she replied without a hint of humility. "Sterling's going to lose his mind." She turned to check her reflection one final time, and I noticed the back seam sitting perfectly, waiting patiently like a time bomb. As maid of honor, I was responsible for the final dress check before she walked down the aisle. I circled her slowly, pretending to inspect for imperfections while actually confirming Madison's handiwork. The alterations were invisible. Tiny modifications to the tension points, redistributed pressure zones, and strategically weakened threads at the stress convergence. Under normal conditions, the dress would hold beautifully. Under the weight of a train, gravity, and Pearl's self-importance, physics would take its course. "All perfect," I pronounced with a tight smile. "Absolutely nothing to worry about." Pearl's father arrived to escort her down the aisle, looking like a man being led to a very expensive execution. I took my place at the front of the procession line, clutching my bouquet of white roses, alabaster white, not simply white because God forbid. The music began, not Wagner's traditional wedding march, but a string quartet version of a Taylor Swift song that Pearl insisted spoke to her journey with Sterling, despite it clearly being about breaking up with someone. The wedding coordinator gave me my cue, and I began the slow, measured walk down the aisle. 300 of Connecticut's most influential stared as I processed. Old money, new money, aspiring money, and the handful of Pearl's actual friends who hadn't been alienated during wedding planning. I smiled serenely, catching the photographer's eye and giving the imperceptible nod we'd arranged, ensuring he was positioned for the perfect rear angle. When I reached the altar, I turned just as Pearl prepared to make her grand entrance. The collective intake of breath was audible. She really did look like a princess, standing in a halo of light at the end of the aisle. The string quartet swelled dramatically. Pearl's smile was triumphant as every eye in the room fixed on her. It was time. I caught her eye and mouthed my final instruction. Shoulders back, slow steps. Perfect posture would ensure maximum pressure on the critical stress points. Slower walking would extend the time frame of the progressive failure, making it impossible to miss. As Pearl began her procession, I fingered the emerald silk swatch in my pocket, the only salvageable piece from my ruined Marchesa, my good luck charm. For the first 10 steps, everything looked perfect. Pearl glided down the aisle, her father struggling to match her pace while maintaining his dignity. The photographer circled discreetly, capturing each perfect moment. Then, on step 11, it began. The first sign was so subtle that only someone looking for it would notice. A slight separation at the lowest point of the back seam. Just enough to reveal a hint of Pearl's something blue, the La Perla lingerie she'd special ordered from Paris. By step 15, the separation had widened imperceptibly. 2 more steps, and it increased by another centimeter. Pearl, focused on her adoring audience and Sterling's awestruck face, noticed nothing. The genius of Madison's alterations was their progressive nature. This wasn't a catastrophic, immediate failure. That would have been merciful. Instead, with each gliding step, each shift of weight, the seam continued its methodical surrender to physics and karma. I watched the exact moment awareness rippled through the crowd. It started with the guests in the back rows, the slight widening of eyes, the discreet nudging of elbows, the poorly suppressed reactions. Like a wave, the awareness moved forward row by row. Pearl remained blissfully oblivious, basking in what she assumed was the collective admiration of Greenwich society. In reality, she was creating the most memorable wedding entrance in Covington Country Club history, just not for the reasons she intended. The photographer, true to our arrangement, captured everything from the perfect angle, the progressive revelation, the growing reaction, and Pearl's continued confident stride, completely unaware of her impending social doom. By the time Pearl reached the halfway point, the back of her dress had separated enough to fully display her something blue to the entire back half of the assembled guests. Sterling's grandmother, a formidable woman who still referred to television as the picture shows, looked like she might faint. Sterling's business associates, conservative banking executives with wives in sensible pearls, were suddenly finding the ceiling architecture fascinating. I maintained my serene bridesmaid smile, though inside I was experiencing the kind of satisfaction that probably required therapy to address. This was better than I'd imagined. Not just a wardrobe malfunction, but a slow-motion social catastrophe playing out in front of the exact people Pearl had spent her entire life trying to impress. Pearl reached the altar steps, still oblivious, her smile radiant. Sterling's expression, however, had transitioned from love-struck to confused concern. He clearly saw something wasn't right, but couldn't figure out how to communicate. The back of your dress is completely open, in front of everyone without creating a scene. The minister began the ceremony with practiced solemnity. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. I watched Pearl's face, counting down the seconds until awareness would strike. Sterling was desperately trying to signal something with his eyes. His best man looked like he was witnessing a car crash in slow motion. The front row guests, now with full view of the situation, were exhibiting physical symptoms of secondhand embarrassment. And then it happened. Pearl felt it. The slight breeze where no breeze should be. The whispers that couldn't be explained away as emotional wedding guests. Sterling's increasingly panicked eye movements. She reached behind her, attempting to seem casual, and her fingers found nothing but air where fabric should be. Her face transformed from bridal bliss to dawning horror. I watched the color drain from her cheeks as she realized what was happening. She turned slightly, trying to assess the damage without being obvious, and caught my eye. In that moment of sheer panic, I leaned forward and whispered the words I'd been waiting 2 years to say. It was an accident. Grow up and get over it. It's not like it's important. Recognition flashed in her eyes. First confusion, then realization, then pure, unfiltered rage. She knew. She knew exactly what I had done and why. But what could she do? Run screaming from her own wedding? Announce to 300 guests that her sister had sabotaged her dress? There was nowhere to go, no exit strategy, no way to salvage this moment except to continue with as much dignity as one can muster while displaying designer lingerie to Connecticut's elite. As Pearl turned back to the minister, attempting to proceed while using her bouquet as a partial shield, I caught Madison's eye from her discreet position near the back. She gave me the slightest nod, professional recognition of a job well executed. The ceremony continued in an atmosphere of exquisite discomfort. Pearl, now holding her bouquet behind her in a death grip, recited her vows through clenched teeth. Sterling looked like a man trying to solve a particularly complex math problem while his house was on fire. And I stood there, the perfect maid of honor, supportive and attentive, already mentally drafting the email I would send to the Vogue digital team about the unfortunate technical error that would soon share Pearl's humiliation with the world. If you've never watched a bride try to complete her wedding vows while simultaneously using a bouquet as a makeshift dress repair, let me tell you, it's the kind of entertainment money can't buy. Except I did technically buy it, for exactly $600 in Madison's alteration fees, which might be the best return on investment since Bitcoin's early days. Pearl's face had settled into a frozen smile that would have concerned her Botox technician, a rictus of pure social panic held together by sheer willpower and generations of WASP training. Meanwhile, Sterling looked like he was mentally calculating the deposit losses if he called the whole thing off right then. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister finally declared, looking relieved to be nearly done with whatever fresh hell was unfolding before him. "You may kiss the bride." Sterling leaned in cautiously, like a man approaching an unexploded bomb. The kiss was quick, the kind you give when you're not sure if your in-laws are watching or if your new wife might actually bite you. The guests applauded with the desperate enthusiasm of people who had collectively decided to pretend nothing unusual was happening. As the recessional music began, Pearl faced her first strategic dilemma: how to exit the chapel without fully displaying her something blue to everyone who hadn't yet enjoyed the view. She locked eyes with me, her expression clearly communicating that fratricide was now on her to-do list. "Need some help, sis?" I whispered sweetly, positioning myself behind her. I could walk very close and block the view. For a moment, relief flooded her face, then suspicion. "Why would you help me now?" 300 people are watching, I replied practically, and I've made my point. With no better options, Pearl allowed me to position myself strategically behind her. We began our recessional walk, Pearl clutching Sterling's arm with one hand and holding her bouquet behind her with the other, while I followed close enough to provide partial coverage. From the front, they looked like the perfect couple. From the back, it was clear that the bride was experiencing a wardrobe situation that would feature in Greenwich therapy sessions for years to come. The true genius of my plan revealed itself during the post-ceremony photography session. Pearl was trapped in a couture nightmare, unable to cancel the photographs without explaining why, but equally unable to pose from anything but the front angle. "Let's get some shots from behind to showcase the train," suggested the photographer with practiced innocence. "No." Pearl's response was so sharp it could have cut glass. "I mean, let's focus on faces, emotions, the front parts." The photographer looked confused. "But the back detail of the dress is extraordinary. Vera Wang's team specifically requested." I said no. Pearl's voice had dropped to a dangerous register. I stepped in smoothly. "What my sister means is she'd prefer to start with frontal shots and save the architectural details for later. Perhaps after the reception? When everyone's more relaxed." The photographer shrugged and adjusted his plan. Pearl shot me a look that was 1 part gratitude, 9 parts murderous intent. During the cocktail hour, Pearl disappeared with her emergency styling team, no doubt attempting to MacGyver the dress back together with whatever tools were available. I circulated among the guests, playing my role as the supportive sister while collecting reactions like rare butterflies. "Is the dress supposed to be modern like that?" asked one of Sterling's elderly aunts, clearly struggling with the concept of visible lingerie at a Presbyterian wedding. "Pearl's always been a fashion-forward bride," I replied diplomatically. Sterling's father, a man who looked like he'd never been comfortable a day in his life, cornered me by the champagne tower. "Is this some sort of statement? Some New York fashion thing?" "Oh, Mr. Bishop," I said with practiced concern. "These designer dresses can be so unpredictable, but Pearl's handling it with such grace, don't you think? Not everyone could maintain their composure after such a revealing ceremony." When Pearl finally emerged for the reception entrance, she'd undergone emergency alterations. Someone had managed to safety pin the dress into submission, and she'd wrapped a decorative shawl around her shoulders that suspiciously matched the table runners. It was a valiant effort, but like putting a Band-Aid on a shark bite, technically addressed but fooling absolutely no one. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "please welcome for the first time Mr. and Mrs. Sterling Bishop III. The guests rose, applauding with renewed enthusiasm, now that the bride was appropriately covered. Pearl's smile had regained some of its confidence as she and Sterling took to the dance floor for their first dance, a carefully choreographed routine to an acoustic version of a song whose lyrics Pearl clearly hadn't analyzed beyond the title. I watched from my maid of honor table, savoring the moment like a fine wine. Phase 1 had been executed perfectly, but revenge, like a good editorial feature, requires proper follow-through. During my maid of honor speech, I was the epitome of sisterly affection, sharing carefully selected childhood anecdotes that seemed sweet on the surface, but reminded everyone present that Pearl had always taken what didn't belong to her. Even at 5 years old, I reminisced fondly, Pearl knew exactly what she wanted and exactly how to get it, whether it was the last cookie, my favorite toys, or apparently Sterling's heart. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. She's always lived by her own special motto: take what you want, and don't worry about the damage. I raised my glass to the increasingly uncomfortable couple. To Pearl and Sterling, may you always get exactly what you deserve. The reception proceeded with manufactured joy, Pearl's humiliation temporarily papered over by alcohol and social conditioning. But while guests danced and pretended the ceremony had been completely normal, I was busy with Phase 2. The Vogue digital team had captured everything: multiple angles, high-definition close-ups, the progressive revelation of Pearl's bridal lingerie to Connecticut's most conservative families. As maid of honor and Vogue liaison, I had first review of the photos before they were processed for the digital feature. "These are all unusable," I told the lead photographer with manufactured disappointment while discreetly selecting the most devastating images for a separate folder. "We'll need to focus on the reception coverage for the feature." "That's a shame," he replied, genuinely disappointed. I got some incredible architectural shots of the dress in motion. The back detail was actually quite dramatic. "Yes, well, sometimes fashion makes unexpected statements," I said diplomatically. "Send everything to my work server for review before final selection." By midnight, the reception was winding down. Pearl and Sterling departed for their honeymoon suite, where they would spend the night before flying to Bora Bora the next morning. Pearl hugged me with brittle affection during their exit, whispering between clenched teeth, "I know what you did." I hugged her back just as tightly. "Consider it my wedding gift. Something borrowed, something blue, something completely ruined." After the newlyweds departed, I returned to my hotel room and opened my laptop. The photographs had already been uploaded to the Vogue server, including the separate folder of what I'd labeled architectural reference shots. 37 high-definition images documenting Pearl's progressive wardrobe failure from every possible angle. Creating a technical error in a digital system isn't difficult when you've spent 6 months befriending the IT department with weekly coffee deliveries and genuine interest in their cybersecurity concerns. Using access temporarily granted to me for photo review, I carefully configured an email redirect that would accidentally send the unfiltered photo folder instead of the approved selection. It took exactly 12 minutes to arrange the accidental email distribution of the unedited wedding photos to the entire Bishop family contact list, Pearl's social circle, and, most devastatingly, Sterling's conservative business associates. The email went out at 3:17 a.m. with a cheerful subject line, "Sneak Peek, Bishop Remington Wedding Highlights." I closed my laptop, ordered a celebratory room service ice cream sundae, and slept the peaceful sleep of the righteously vindictive. By 7:30 the next morning, my phone was exploding with notifications. Pearl had called 17 times. Our mother had called 12. Even Sterling had called, his voice message consisting mainly of uncomfortable throat clearing. I answered none of them, instead sending Pearl a single text. "It was an accident. Grow up and get over it. It's not like it's important." Then I turned my phone off, put on my sunglasses, and checked out of the hotel. The damage was done, the revenge complete, and my Emerald Marchesa, or what was left of it, had finally been avenged. Some people might call it petty. I call it poetic justice delivered with impeccable timing and professional-grade execution. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've found it's actually best served in high-resolution JPEG format to 374 of Connecticut's most judgmental email addresses. 6 months after the wedding incident, as it's now euphemistically called in Greenwich social circles, I was promoted to features editor at Vogue. Not because of my sisterly sabotage, though I admit the timing was suspiciously convenient, but because the digital feature I eventually published about wedding traditions and modern interpretations broke engagement records. I carefully selected front-facing photos of Pearl and Sterling, looking appropriately matrimonial and fully clothed, while my analysis of the tension between tradition and unexpected moments in contemporary ceremonies won an industry award for cultural commentary. The irony wasn't lost on me. Pearl and Sterling never made it to Bora Bora. According to my mother, who has still not forgiven me but can't stop herself from sharing gossip, they had a serious discussion the morning after the wedding, when Sterling's phone started exploding with messages from business associates who had received my special photo collection. Apparently, having your new wife's lingerie-clad posterior appear in the inboxes of conservative banking executives does not bode well for that promotion to partner he'd been pursuing for months. They separated 3 weeks later. The official story was irreconcilable differences discovered during honeymoon planning. But Greenwich has a gossip network more efficient than the Pentagon. Everyone knew. The photos had been screenshot, saved, shared, and discussed in every country club locker room and ladies' luncheon from Connecticut to the Hamptons. Sterling moved back to his family's lake house and filed for annulment, claiming the marriage had been entered under false pretenses. Pearl retreated to our parents' guest house, where she reportedly spent 2 months watching reality television and ordering excessive amounts of Thai food delivery. Her Instagram went dark except for vague quotes about rising from ashes over sunset backgrounds. I sent her a condolence bouquet of alabaster white roses with a card that read, "Dress mishaps happen. Grow up and get over it. It's not like it was important." She blocked my number after that. Fair enough. Sterling's mother, Olivia, unexpectedly sent me a handwritten thank you note on monogrammed stationery. "Your sister wasn't right for our family. Your timing was impeccable. The Bishop Foundation would love to feature your work at our annual charity gala." Apparently, Pearl had made a fatal error at their first meeting by suggesting they replace the traditional family silver with something more modern and less grandmotherly. In Greenwich, insulting family heirlooms is tantamount to high treason. As for me, I framed what remained of my ruined Marchesa dress, the small emerald swatch I'd carried in my pocket during the wedding, and hung it in my new corner office at Vogue. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes justice requires strategic patience and exceptional attention to detail. Eleanor Montgomery, the Vogue executive who hadn't noticed me at graduation, now stops by regularly to discuss upcoming features. Last week, she paused before leaving my office, eyeing the framed fabric. "Interesting art piece," she commented. "Marchesa?" "Vintage," I confirmed. "From their 2018 collection. Shame it's just a scrap," she said. "That particular green would have looked exceptional on you." I smiled. It did. Once. I remember now. she said thoughtfully. There was a girl at Parsons' graduation in a black Zara dress who had the most incisive portfolio I'd seen in years. That could have been you in this fabric instead. Life rarely goes exactly as planned, I replied. But sometimes the detours are surprisingly effective. She raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow, waiting for elaboration. I offered none. Some stories are better kept as personal motivation. People often ask if I regret what I did to Pearl. The answer is complex. I don't regret the execution. It was flawless, if I do say so myself. I don't regret the public humiliation. It was proportional to the offense and her dismissive response. What I do occasionally regret is that it was necessary at all. In the 2 years between my graduation and Pearl's wedding, I could have confronted her directly. I could have demanded an apology or compensation. I could have tried to repair our relationship instead of her dress. But here's what I've learned. Some people only understand consequences when they're wearing them in front of everyone they've tried to impress. Pearl and I speak now, though stiffly and only at mandatory family gatherings. She's dating a real estate developer from Boston who doesn't know the story and probably never will. She's more careful with other people's possessions these days. I consider that growth. Sterling married his college girlfriend last year in a small, private ceremony with strict security, and, I assume, a thoroughly tested dress. I sent a congratulatory text. He didn't respond, but his new wife follows me on Instagram, which I choose to interpret as forgiveness. My mother thinks I'm going to hell. My father secretly high-fived me at Christmas. Balance, I suppose. As for Madison, the assistant to Vera Wang's senior alterations specialist who executed my vision with such precision, she's now the head costume designer for a hit television series about wealthy families destroying each other over petty grievances. I wrote her recommendation letter. The Emerald Marchesa, or what's left of it, remains my talisman. Not because I'm clinging to past injuries, but because it reminds me that value isn't determined by what others think is important. Pearl thought my dress, my career moment, my carefully saved money were meaningless compared to her momentary desire. She was wrong. Sometimes in life, you have to engineer your own justice, stitch by carefully loosened stitch. Sometimes you have to stand back and watch as someone walks confidently down the aisle of their own downfall, beaming with the mistaken belief that they've gotten away with it. And sometimes, just occasionally, you get to be the person who whispers, "You might want to look behind you at exactly the right moment." That's not pettiness. That's not even revenge. That's the poetic justice of realizing that what goes around comes around, sometimes wearing something blue in front of 300 of your closest friends.